Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Talking to Tweens, Middle Grade Authors You Need to Know. I'm Ronny Khuri, Books for Youth Associate Editor at Booklist. And before we begin, I will go over some technical details. So if you're in the audience, you are in listen-only mode, but we definitely welcome any questions that you might have. So on the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or if you need technical assistance, just click Q&A and type your message into the box that pops up. We are going to respond to all tech-related questions. And since we're having a good Q&A portion today, if you have questions for our panelists, for the authors, we will try to fit those into our conversation if we can. And if we can't, they'll have a chance to follow up with you afterwards via email. Also, we are offering closed captioning on all of our webinars. So to enable or disable captions on your screen, excuse me, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar that I mentioned before. From there, you can select show or hide subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting subtitle settings. Today, we will have the pleasure of hearing from Susan Juby, author of Me 3, Salma Hussain, author of The Secret Diary of Mona Hassan, and David A. Robertson, author of The Stone Child, Book 3 in the MISEWA Saga. We will hear a brief introduction from each author about their books, and then after that, we will move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. So again, if you're in the audience, feel free to start asking questions now and throughout the entire show. And first up, we will hear from Susan Juby. Susan is the critically acclaimed and award-winning author of 8 novels for teenagers. Her debut novel, Alice, I Think, the first of the Alice MacLeod trilogy, was made into a successful television series. The Truth Commission was the winner of the Sheila A. Egoff Award and was shortlisted for several other awards and named to several best of lists. She is also the author of a memoir, Nice Recovery, and the adult comic novels, The Wofield Poetry Collective and The Republic of Dirt. Susan lives in Nanaimo, British Columbia, Canada. Thanks for being here, Susan.
Thank you, Ronny, and welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am on Nanaimo territory here in Nanaimo, the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, and it is a beautiful place to live. And I'm grateful every day for this place. I will also say that I am grateful to Booklist for putting this panel together. It's a great topic, and to Grace and Ronny and to my fellow panelists, I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and thanks for everyone who is in attendance here. So my book, Me 3, is about 11-year-old Ronny, who is, he's taken a lot of his self-esteem from the fact that his father's a very famous gambler in Las Vegas. And his father also has a show where a television show where he takes celebrities and he teaches them how to play poker and takes them to high stakes games. So Rodney gets a lot of reflected glory from this. And when we meet him, his entire existence has been sort of blown apart by some accusations against his father. And when we meet him, he and his sister and his mother have gone to a small town in Arizona, very different from the kind of place he's used to living in, which is Vegas. And he is busy trying to keep at bay the accusations against his father. So he refuses to believe they could possibly be true because he idolizes his dad, which, you know, you can understand if you had a cool celebrity dad. And he's, you know, his mother and his sister are both really in pieces about this, but he's got his full defense shields up, his denial shields up. And over the course of the book, he has to come to terms with the fact that his father has done what he's been accused of, and that his father's actions have turned his whole world upside down. And this is very tricky territory. We're, I think, during our discussion going to talk about handling difficult subjects with tweens. In this case, I wondered, oh, do you really want to write this? And I thought, yes, I do. I think that it's important for all young people to understand the major issues that are moving through our world. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. And I got the idea from early in the Me Too movement, when it was revealed that a lot of the people facing consequences for their action had preteen kids. And I thought, wow, that would be a very difficult thing to take in at a time when life is already in so much flux. So the book, as well as being about the issues related to his father, the book is also about trauma and how Rodney deals with his trauma. So he first tries denial, which is a pretty natural way to handle a very painful subject. And then he starts casting around for other models of masculinity, other ways to deal with his feelings. And he gets, he makes friends with a couple of boys his own age who are into adrenaline sports. And so they start getting into some fairly dangerous activities. And he really has to analyze, is this how I want to deal with my feelings? And over the course of the book, he learns that maybe that's not for him. Maybe he's going to deal with his trauma by talking to his friends about it, talking to his parents, or pardon me, his mother and his sister, and acknowledging that he's more fearful than he would like to be. And he learns over the course of the book to tend to his own heart, which is really a big job for anybody. I am right now helping to raise my 8-year-old niece, and she's keenly interested in challenging stories and difficult stories. And so I spend a lot of time answering questions about things like war and things like poverty. She wants to know about everything she hears about. And so I'm going to read you a little bit from the book. So this is told, this is Ronny writing to his best friend Larry, who stopped responding to him. Larry's mother worked for Rodney's dad. And so this is the beginning, near the beginning of Me3. As you know better than anyone, Lair, the coolest thing about me was always my dad. And my mom says we can't mention him here. What good is having a dad who's a famous professional poker player who wrote Get Lucky, one of the best-selling poker books of all time, and who is also the star of Get Lucky TV, if you can't mention it? You know how it is, since your mom's the head producer, and we get to share in the glory together. Anyway, the point is that we're using my mom's last name until things settle down, whatever that means. Which reminds me, I'm sorry about your mom and everyone else who lost their jobs when the show got canceled. My dad says it's just temporary until everything gets figured out. As soon as that happens, everyone can go back to work and we can come home and things will get back to how they used to be. I just want you to know that none of what they're saying is true. Missy Stevenson is not telling the truth. My dad didn't do what she said. He would never do that to someone, especially not a celebrity guest who's also a movie star. I really hope you know that. My dad's whole job is taking famous people to high stakes games, as if he would ever do something to one of them. You might be wondering why we just disappeared a couple of weeks ago. Maybe you're even a little mad about it. Well, we had this family meeting and my dad explained the misunderstanding that happened at work. It was pretty bad. The meeting, I mean. No one likes family meetings unless they're about where to go on holidays. Even then, they're not that fun in our family because my sister hates sunshine and joy. But this meeting was extra bad. My mom didn't speak the whole time. My dad said he had to go away for a while because of the misunderstandings and false accusations, but he promised it would all work out and that we should follow his rule number 2 for having a lucky life. Look for the upside. So I'll leave it there, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone else.
Thank you so much, Susan. We will now hear from Salma Hussain. Selma grew up in the UAE and immigrated to Canada when she was 13 years old. She is a BA in English Literature with a concentration in creative writing from the University of Calgary, a law degree from the University of Calgary, and a master's in law from McGill University. Her short stories and poems have been published in Filling Station, West Coast Line, Other Voices, and in the anthology Homebound, Muslim Women Poetry Collection from Outburst Press. She was also a mentee in the Diaspora Dialogues long-form mentorship program last year. She lives with her family in Toronto. Thank you so much for being here, Selma.
Great. Thank you so much, Ronny, for that intro. Thank you to all the participants for being here, the panelists for joining in on this great discussion. I'm so excited, slightly nervous, but more excited. So welcome, everybody. I'm beaming in from Toronto, Ontario, which is just do a quick acknowledgement of this beautiful land that I'm on. This is the traditional territory of many First Nations people, including the Mississaugas, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and more. So I'm very grateful to be here. I'm going to jump in and read from The Secret Diary of Mona Hassan. So this is a book written in diary format in the voice of an 11-year-old girl who, similar to me, grew up in the United Arab Emirates, which is a country in the Middle East. And this is set during the first Gulf War, 1991. So she moves from there to Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, a small town in Canada. January 5th, 1991. Tomorrow is the first school day of the new year, and I can't wait to go back to the second half of 6th grade. The December break was a major snooze fest. Other than the beach on Fridays and excursions to the closest mall on weekdays, Tutu, my sister, and I spent most of our holidays inside our air-conditioned apartment, fighting each other for the remote control. It's just our luck to be stuck in the most boring city on earth. Nothing exciting ever happens in our corner of the world. January 6th, 1991. Old is gold, but new is bold. At the morning assembly, we found out that we have a brand new principal this year, Mr. Khuri. Mr. Khuri sang along to the UAE national anthem. Then he gave a short speech afterwards. He said he's honored to be our new principal and is looking forward to getting to know all of us. What kind of man principal wants to know his girl students? We had to hold back our snickers. Mr. Khuri also announced his first rule change. He wants the girls to use the gymnasium for PT class and learn actual sports. No more running around the field playing tag. Mr. Khuri spent 10 long minutes giving a lecture about how playing sports would make our brains stronger and faster. Little does he know that my brain is already strong and fast. And what I'm really hoping for is that sports will make my chest bigger and rounder. January 8th, 1991. Today, we were supposed to have our first ever gym class, and I was so excited to learn about new chest-scoring sports. But alas, we're off to a very bad start. Our whole class had to spend the morning standing at our desks, and our much-anticipated first gym class ever has now been moved to next week. Someone wrote "Sports are for sluts" on one of the washroom walls, and PT class was cancelled. SLUT was underlined 3 times in thick, angry lines. Who wrote this word? Our homeroom teacher, Mrs. Adila, demanded all morning. No one looked up. What does this word mean? We asked each other at lunchtime. No one could find it in any dictionary, so it's clearly misspelled. January 10th, 1991. Uncle Annoying dropped by today with his wife and their newborn baby. Uncle Annoying is Abba's friend from work, and we haven't seen him since the New Year's party. Ammi and Uncle Annoying's wife disappeared into the kitchen, and Abba went downstairs to fetch a new copy of the newspaper, as he had spilled coffee on the one from this morning. Uncle Annoying took everyone's absence as his cue to play an annoying game where he chased Tutu and I around the living room, grabbed us from behind and started tickling us. We're much too old for this game, so I came up with an escape plan pretty quickly. With my thumb and pointer finger, I latched onto a single one of his arm hairs and yanked. Dead sudden and hard. He dropped me like a hot potato after that. Poor Tutu had to struggle for longer. When our parents were back and gathered in the living room again, they dove into a discussion of the headlines in this week's newspapers. Iraqi president promises mother of all battles, and 9 injured in border state bomb blast, and truce in hotspot region under threat, again. Nothing exciting ever happens in the UAE, but there is bad news happening all around us. There's lots of fighting going on, and the latest ones to enter the boxing ring are Iraq and Kuwait. They started fighting last summer and are still at it this year. Because of their fighting, satellite dishes have popped up everywhere, and we now have a new American TV channel showing us the bad news nonstop. This new channel's motto seems to be, why worry later when you can worry right now? All the grown-ups in the UAE watch the news and read 3 different newspapers in 2 different languages every day. Everyone wants to know, is the bad news moving closer? In the back pages of today's Gulf News, I noticed a box with a thick black border, a pointy leaf, and an announcement in rhyme. Want old age pension and free healthcare? Oceans, mountains, and fresh air? then call Canada's top immigration experts, Mr. Sharma and Associates, today. Make haste and do not delay. And then I skip forward a month or so, March 30th, 1991. Ami and Appa argued about that word immigration against last night, which I looked up, and it appears that my parents are arguing about moving to a new country. Our parents have always blindly done whatever they've wanted, but this one would really take the cake. So that's about the snippet I wanted to give you about this novel. This is a coming of age novel. There's the tougher topics I address in this novel are, there's classism in here, there's colorism. As you heard, there's a creepy older family friend. There's racism. So, you know, and we'll talk about this, why I threw in some of these harder topics. Wanted to keep the language very accessible. I wanted to have a very funny tone to this story, but also look at some of the hardships and realities that many kids face and go through. So that's what I did in this story. It really is a story of this young girl, this character facing and confronting the absurdity of the world around her, and inviting the reader to come along and join her on this journey that most of us, almost all of us, we all take during adolescence, where we, you know, we're not just dealing with our changing bodies, but we're dealing with the changing world around us and our perception of what we thought was the world. And I see I have 1 minute left. So anyway, so that's a quick snapshot of what's in this book. There's lots of different issues. And I hope you'll join Mona as she discovers and talks about them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selma. And we'll have plenty more time to delve deeper into that book. But first, we will hear from David A. Robertson. David is the author of numerous books for young readers, including When We Were Alone, which won the 2017 Governor General's Literary Award. The Barren Grounds, the first book in the middle grade, the MISEWA Saga, received a starred review from Kirkus and was a Kirkus and Quill and Choir Best Middle Grade Book of 2020, as well as a USBBY and Texas Lone Star selection, and nominated for the Ontario Library Association's Silver Birch Award. A sought-after speaker and educator, as well as recent recipient of the Writers' Union of Canada's Freedom to Read Award, Dave is a member of the Norway House Cree Nation and currently lives in Winnipeg. For more information, you can visit his website, darobertson.ca, and follow him on Twitter at DaveAlexRoberts. Take it away, David.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Ronnie. And I'm just really excited to share the stage with Susan and Salma. Been looking forward to this presentation. So I guess what I'll do is I'll just talk to you a little bit about the MISEWA Saga in general, and then the Stone Child in particular. And I guess I should mention first that I'm coming from Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1 territory, and I'm a Norway House Cree Nation band member, which is in Treaty 5 territory. The MISEWA Saga is a series that came about, I guess, really from years of reading books that I didn't see myself reflected in when I was a kid. It was something that I really missed, and it was something that a lot of my classmates would have really have benefited from, reading stories about Indigenous people from Indigenous writers, own voice stories. Those are things that would have been really empowering and would have made me and other Indigenous children feel really valued. And so when I started writing professionally, to try to make sure in whatever capacity I could to put books out there in the world that, first of all, that Indigenous children could read that reflected them, but also that non-Indigenous kids could read and learn. And so most of my work has been for children for that reason. And the MISEWA Saga is no different. What I saw in the MISEWA Saga was an opportunity to, first of all, write about, write a story that I've been interested in writing for quite a while. I guess write about elements in a story that I've been interested in writing for quite a while. Time travel is something I've always been interested in. I even like bad time travel stories, and portal stories are something that I grew up reading. When I was looking back on all my favorite books when I was a kid, whether they had Indigenous characters or not in them, they were all portal stories. So I could see why this became a portal story. I think the biggest influence for me on this book was learning from a Cree astronomer, really smart, really amazing guy over in Winnipeg his name is Wilfred Buck, and he had a lot of great research that he was documenting on Cree constellation stories, and I just saw the richness in those stories and the value of the messages that they had, and just decided that I really would love to adapt some of them into a series. And so I began with the Barren Grounds, and the Barren Grounds was a book that introduced two Cree characters, Morgan and Eli, who had been in the foster care system for different periods of time. So Eli was new to the foster care system. Morgan had been in the foster care system for many years. And it was also a way in which I could bring up the foster care system to younger readers, because I felt like it was important that kids learned about some difficult aspects of Canadian history and contemporary society in a way that was age appropriate. And so that's something I've been really happy that I've been able to do. And it also talked about climate change and land stewardship. The Great Bear is a book that talks about anti-bullying, again, foster care, and all these books have accurate, truthful representations of Indigenous characters. The Stone Child is the third book. Now, why I've taken so long to get there is because The Great Bear ends on a really big cliffhanger. And I was thinking about doing a reading from it, but I don't think that I can, because if I did, I would be giving a mountain of spoilers away to readers who are hopefully eagerly awaiting the release of The Stone Child in August. But I can say that The Stone Child is another book that is fun to read, middle grade fantasy, but it also deals with difficult subjects, but I think important subjects. So again, you have the continuation of foster care, you have gender identity, you have a discussion on loss and grief, and how to manage through those emotions and through those experiences. So, and what I would say is that when I write stories like this, and I know I've dealt with a lot of difficult subjects in my work, like When We Were Alone, on residential school history, is I never write down to kids. I have a great faith in the readiness of kids and their intelligence, their capacity for change. What I think most about is age appropriateness, and so that has been my focus in the work that I do. And I've written a wide range of literature because I want to reach a wide audience. I look for gaps that are there in education and in literature, and I try to fill those gaps with the stories that I've written. And a big part of my work is going out and speaking to kids and meeting them in person or virtually, and having important conversations with them. What I love is that, with something like the Barren Grounds and the Great Bear, I've been able to speak to tens of thousands of kids over the last year and a half. And each one of them now knows a little bit more about foster care and how it impacts Indigenous children. And I think that there's a great value in that. But I guess that's all I would really say. And I'm really thankful to be asked to be on the panel and to share the stage with such amazing writers.
Thank you so much, David. And that is our last presentation. So I can invite Susan and Selma to rejoin with their cameras, and we can get into Q&A. Again, if you're in the audience, we have a lot of wonderful greetings coming in from the audience, but we're also looking for questions from you if you have them, so feel free. but I will kick things off, of course. And we'll start with Susan, but this will be a question for everybody. So I just wanted to kind of by way of introduction, ask about your author journey and how you kind of came to middle grade and why this book in particular needed to be middle grade, because I believe you've all written sort of in other categories for other age groups, genres. So why middle grade and why this book?
Well, I've written, as you mentioned before, 8 young adult novels, so sort of 14 and up, and a memoir, and 2, well, now 3 adult novels. And when the idea for this novel came to me, it came to me in the form of an 11-year-old. I could see him, I could hear him, and there was something about that developmental stage and the situation that he's facing that felt really important to combine the two of them, because he's very busy working on his identity, his ideas about relationships, his ideas about masculinity and what he admires and what he finds exciting. So, and of course, that led to trying to find a balance between addressing the topic, but in a general way, in a sensitive way, so that it's not too much for a young reader. So that's why he just, he spoke to me, and he was 11. It was that simple. And so I always try to honor the characters who show up in my mind.
Great, thank you. And so let's go to Salma next. Your debut middle grade novel. What about this story had to be middle grade for you?
Well, I'm not as established and illustrious as the other 2 authors, so I've not written as much as they have. I have written a little bit, and I will say the voice of a child is a voice that I come back to often in my work, in one form or the other. It's not always intended for a child audience, but this story did feel very much intended for a child's audience. And why? Couple of reasons. I wanted a female. Okay, so this is a story about a Pakistani Muslim girl who's moving to North America. We don't have enough representation of that, number one. Number two, I wanted to add a slightly different representation of the general representation of Muslim females that we have received in North America. So I wanted to be a little bit more playful and do that. So I needed a character who was going through that the reader would follow through as she went through her first period, her first crush, her first kiss, and that developmentally is an 11-year-old. I did play around with, I will say I played around with aging her up a little bit and making her 13, but it didn't quite work for the comic elements I wanted to put in. Like, really had to be somebody who's just freshly seeing the world. And I think Susan captures it perfectly when she says, developmentally, the 11-year-old is so ripe for looking at the world and trying to make sense of everything. And it's just such a magical age where you're really like, wow, anything is possible. And why do things have to be the way they are? It's a great age to look at life with wonder and absurdity. So I feel like this was truly a middle grade story. It could not have been otherwise.
Yeah. What about you, David?
Well, the protagonist, the main protagonist of the MISEWA Saga for the first 3 books anyway, is a character called Morgan. And Morgan is a Cree girl who has been in foster care for a long time, ever since she was a toddler. And I really think that actually Salma and Susan alluded to one of the reasons that I felt like it had to be middle grade is that it's a period of change. She's going through an important time in her life where so much is happening. I think it's she's just turned 13, and that's really hard, no matter who you are. On top of that, she is also grappling with the difficulty of trying to understand herself and her identity, and also dealing with the trauma of having bounced from foster home to foster home to foster home, and all of that has come to a head for her. And this journey that the characters go on in the MISEWA Saga, in particular Morgan, every book there's a really harrowing adventure that they go on, but really in every book it's a very personal journey, and it's a continued journey of Morgan towards an understanding of her identity not only an understanding of her identity, but a reconnection to it. And I think that is really important, and the healing that comes from that reconnection. And so it's really a journey to self. And I felt like that age was a perfect age to concentrate on, because of the things that she was going through, and the journey that she had to go on to become a fully realized character, but also just a girl who is comfortable in her own skin, who loves herself and loves who she is. A great message for any kid.
Yeah. Let me stay with you, David, and turn our focus more to our protagonists. I mean, going back to the Barren Grounds, I mean, in a world where a lot of middle grade fantasy is focused on world building and starting with the action and blowing things up immediately, you really take the time to sit with the characters before they go through the portal, and really keep them front and center. So I guess, did you have a particular inspiration for Morgan or Eli? And did they evolve kind of with you as you wrote them and are working through the series?
Yeah, I guess to answer the first part of that, even though it wasn't a question, was that I really like classical literature. I like older literature, and I feel like older literature is very patient, and it takes a little bit more time. And I felt like that was really doing a service to these characters, in particular Morgan. And so I felt, with Morgan, what I feel is that there are stories that have great plots and stories that have great characters. Sometimes they have both. But I feel like without really great characters, the plot doesn't really matter, because the reader connects with the character. The reader empathizes with the character. The more the reader cares about the character, the more willing they are to follow that character, not only through one book, but across a series. And so, developing a character like Morgan, somebody who was flawed, but was really powerful, that has struggles, but had agency, was somebody I worked very hard to develop. And I took a lot of inspiration from my older girls in my own life. I have 3 daughters. 2 of them are teenagers, and they really helped me to bring authenticity to that character. Whether it was just like, Dad, they would never wear those shoes, or Dad, they would never say that, or more, more things of more substance. But so she was definitely a character that I put a lot of work into, and built the plot around her, keeping in mind that it was really her journey for the first 3 books of this series.
Thank you. Susan, let's go to you. You already sort of touched on the inspiration for Rodney, but I wonder if you should have more to say on that.
Yeah, I guess that in the midst of the Me Too movement and the reckoning around that, I feel like maybe not enough attention is paid. People get into their silos or their personal desires, but there are repercussions to our whole society that go down to kids and to family members of people who've experienced this. And so that's part of what I wanted to deal with that. And I've also been doing a lot of sort of reading about the coming of age process and adoption of culture and identity and all that sort of thing. And that's, those are some of the things I wanted to think about, especially in terms of how do you relate to somebody you're attracted to? And what are the power dynamics, and what does consent look like? Little kids learn about, nobody touches my body. But as they get older, it gets more and more confusing, and the media is full of all these wild messages and sort of imagery that kids they're taking in fairly uncritically. And it felt to me like a place, books are the perfect place to develop empathy, critical thinking. You can inhabit things in a safe way and sort of explore an issue through a character and through a situation that way. So those were all things I was interested in looking at in the book, which took a little doing. So.
Selma, Mona feels so real. Where did the inspiration come from? Was there some reality to it, or was it?
There's some reality to it, Ronnie, but also I will say this book, The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole. If you know it, it's a British classic. It's about a young boy it's set during the Margaret Thatcher era of the 1980s. And it's just a funny look about a self-centered boy. I mean, I shouldn't call him self-centered. He's comically clueless, and he's going through life and he's going through puberty, and he just has these really funny, wry observations about life around him. So that was the inspiration for the book. I was like, well, what if this was one of my beloved books when I was growing up, the whole series, there's like a whole bunch of them. So that was the inspiration. I was like, what if I took Adrian Moles and had Adrian Mole be a Pakistani Muslim girl growing up in the Middle East? What would that look like? So that was kind of what I was trying to do. So that was the inspiration. Is it based, I mean, of course, there's some, we would have to sit down, Ronnie, over coffee, and I would tell you, some scenes here and there, you know, are based on this happened to somebody I know, or this part happened to me. So it's a bit of a mishmash of those things, because I did also make that immigration journey. So half the book is, no, it's divided into thirds. A third is set in the United Arab Emirates, where she's grown up. And then she goes and visits Pakistan, where her parents are from. So she spends the summer there with her cousins. And that piece was also important to me. And then the last third happens in Canada, and her adjusting to this new world that she finds herself in. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, well, let me also ask, this comes from the audience, from Jessica Clark. They wanted to know if the whole book is in diary entries, which it is, but I also wanted to ask what inspired that choice?
Again, Adrian Mole.
Yeah,
You know, it happens in a diary format. I'll also say I read this tip from Carol Shields, who is a great Canadian author, has a book on writing. And she said, when you're trying to put a novel together, it's very intimidating things, but if you can think about it in its smallest, most manageable bite size, then you can get through it. So for me, I needed a structure that I could envision myself completing. And it was, big novel is very scary to write, but maybe I can create a novel through small little diary entries. And so that's kind of why I chose the format also.
Right. And Susan, your book is also epistolary. From a craft perspective, why did you come to that choice?
Well, I just want to say, Salma, soulmate Salma, that Adrian Mole is also why I became a writer. And so anyway, it's always so good to hear when a book has touched so many people in so many places. So my first 3 novels were diary format, because it is the perfect comedic format. It's a very, as you say, it's manageable, and you can create, like, sort of have a balance between knowingness and accidental insight and cluelessness. And it just is a perfect way to package that. And I also wanted, in this instance, he's writing letters to his friend who won't respond to text messages, gaming invitations, anything. And he wants to be a writer himself. So he's a very articulate, even if he, you know, he's a little bit detached from reality in some cases. So I thought anybody who wants to be a writer is going to take those opportunities to write things, and just really let it go. And it allows a work to operate on multiple levels. So that's why I chose that.
Let's get a little bit back to our sort of tough topic theme. Although I don't know if tough topic is always the right phrase for that, maybe impactful topic or something like that. But David, the word trauma has come up here, and I know foster care can kind of live in that world. So when you're writing for middle grade, though, where do you draw the line? Because there has to be a line somewhere, I imagine. And you've mentioned you don't talk down to your readers, but so where do you sort of draw that line?
Well, I think some of it comes from having my own kids. You know, I have 5 kids, and we do have hard conversations, as any parent does with their children. And I think as you have those conversations, you become more and more aware of what age a child can be spoken to about certain topics, and what of those topics can you bring up with that kid without scaring them or traumatizing them. And that's something that, I have to be very cognizant of, especially because I deal with difficult subjects for young readers. When I wrote When We Were Alone, there hadn't really been a picture book about residential school history for very young learners yet, for kindergartners, grade ones. And there was some pushback initially because, you didn't feel that it could be done. And my attitude had been, you only think it can't be done because we haven't done it yet. So you have to, in some ways, be a bit bold with your choices, but you have to also be able to understand children enough to know that you can meet them at the level that they're at. For example, with residential school history, you can't bring up difficult traumatic history for a grade 2 kid. They're just not ready for that. It's just like math. If you brought calculus into the classroom at grade 2, you'd be traumatizing a kid, but you start with basic math and then you build on that through a kid's educational experience so that by the time that they're in grade 10 or 11 or 12, they can do algebra, they can do math, and they're ready for it. And that's the same way I approached approaching difficult subjects or teaching difficult subjects to kids through literature. So in foster care, you have to look at the principles of the foster care system, elements of it that you think that kids can understand and they're ready for. And then you weave those into the narrative without being didactic, without being preachy, without trying to talk down to them, and just tell the story. And, with Morgan, you have someone who's been in care for several years. How, at least the research that I've done, I know how that would impact a child. I think that there's a lot of similarities between the experience of Indigenous child in foster care, potentially as an Indigenous children who attended residential schools. They do similar things. What I didn't want to do was to fall into that very stereotypical trope of the evil stepmom. There's a lot of great foster parents out there. My focus was on the system. The system is broken. When you have a system where 60% of the Indigenous children and 60% of the children are Indigenous, that's a huge disproportionate number. What I want kids to think about is, why is that happening? And just to generate some empathy. And that, I think, begins a path towards some healing and some understanding that is helpful over the long term.
Susan, you address a pretty big, challenging subject in what felt like a very safe way, and I mean that as a compliment, safe for the reader. So how did you go about finding that line?
It took a while to find it. So I wanted to deal with, the book is about, not necessarily about what Rodney's father has done, but about the emotional impacts. And he only just starts to get an insight into what's happening there. There's some catcalling on a playground, and he thinks, oh, okay. And he's able to make some connections between small things and this much bigger issue. And so I just tried to be very honest about the emotional fallout from what has happened, and come at things a little bit sideways. So he spends a lot of time learning about dangerous trick bike riding, and he's learning about, as I say, he's dealing with how do I deal with all these overwhelming feelings in a way that suits me, that is right for my personality. And so a lot of it is sort of off stage. He goes to visit his father in a treatment center where his father's essentially hiding. And he just gets glimpses of, oh, this is not a strong person. This is a person who's made some major mistakes and is not dealing with things. And here we are out here dealing with stuff. As a kid, there was a number of very challenging situations in my own life, and sometimes in these conversations, I think, well, life doesn't really wait for kids to be a certain age before really, really hard things, they get hit with them. And so how can we support them in that when they're not ready for things, because kids aren't. Life happens, and it's good for them not to feel alone in that. So that was another consideration for me.
And Selma, you listed earlier kind of quite a few subjects that come up in your book. I don't know that any of one of them is the focus necessarily, but did you have any concerns as you were writing, or did it take some level of revision to kind of hit the right note for your audience?
Yeah, 100%. It did. I think the one that took a bit of revision, or that I went back and forth a little bit on, was the creepy older family friend that they have, and how the two girls, it's Mona and her younger sister, manage and resolve that situation. So hitting the note there and finding kind of an age appropriate way to do it. Again, you want to, like David was saying, you want to set the context, you want to set a foundational, you want to give them just enough information for the stage that they're in to process and to helpfully use to move forward, but you don't want to overwhelm anybody. And so I think when we talk about, tough topics for tweens and what they can handle, I don't know if necessarily there are, I mean, again, I'm saying this very generally, but the topics are out there. Kids are living very difficult lives in most cases. And those are the kids who really need these books, the ones who are, so we write them. I've written this book, hopefully for the kids. So many kids have been displaced recently, have moved over, have had to change everything about their lives. Their childhoods have been taken away from them because of war and displacement. So they're moving over. They're still dealing with all the other stuff that's happening as well. So when we talk about topics to introduce, not introduce, I think, skilled writers will introduce the topics. It's the tone that needs to be, that you have to be very careful with. Like you have to introduce a sense of hope. And as long as you have that hope in there, you have the humor in there, then you can discuss the topics.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I should also say, I don't, we're talking about quote unquote tough topics, but I don't want to reduce these books to just a single topic or, an issue book sort of situation. Every book here is that and much more. I want to try this question that I have stolen from Jennifer Ziegler and Chris Barton, who have a show called This One's Dedicated To, where they ask authors to just explain the dedication in their book. And sometimes it leads sort of to an interesting angle and perspective on the writer in the book. But I don't want to make anyone do it in case it's a personal dedication. But if any of you would like to volunteer to give some backstory on your book's dedication, I think that could be fun. Susan.
Sure, I'll start us off because she would want me to. The book is dedicated to Emily, who is my niece, who's 8. And it's a pretty, the book is too old for her right now, but she's a child who grew up in very, very difficult circumstances, extremely challenging. And it took a while to get her into a safe place in her life. She spent almost 4 years not safe remotely, and so she's now thriving and learning about the world. But so every time I sit down to write, ever since I met her, every book is like, how could I make her feel understand the world in a safe way? So that's where that comes from. And as I say, she's not going to be reading this for a few years yet, probably in a couple of years. But something David said about residential schools is last summer, somebody had their local rock painting club had a huge display in our swimming area of Every Child Matters. And so she picked up that rock and she said, oh, this is so beautiful. What does this mean? And so we had to gradually have that conversation. I had to do a little reading to think, how do I bring this up for her? But I think learning a bit about that helped her to feel like she always has the question, why? Like, why are people bad? Why do people do bad things? But also, oh, I'm not the only kid who has had like some extremely difficult stuff. So yeah, thank you for asking that question.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to? No pressure.
Well,
David.
I think that mine has something to do with Colleen Nelson, if I remember correctly.
You want me to
Is
read
that
it to
right?
you? Yeah.
Yeah. Read it.
Let me pull it up. For the Stone Child. This book is dedicated to Colleen Nelson because a bet is a bet.
Oh, yeah.
Very mysterious.
Well, okay. Well, Colleen Nelson is a wonderful local writer. Works out of Winnipeg, lives and works in Winnipeg, a teacher. I don't know. We had a bet that I was sure something wasn't going to happen. I was so positive it wasn't going to happen. I bet her it wouldn't happen. She bet it would happen, and I said, well, if you're right, I'll dedicate my next book to you. And I'm a man of my word. So I've dedicated the book to Colleen because I lost the bet. Now, I don't know if I can tell you what the bet is. It's nothing untoward or anything. It's a silly thing that, but I made a deal.
That's okay. Congrats to Colleen. She gets it's blasted to our whole audience. Salma, did you also raise your hand?
I did raise my hand. I'll share the story as well. Susan, you and I are such soulmates, as you said. The book is dedicated to my kids. So to my kids, because growing up, I felt my mother was such a mystery, as I think most of us do. We feel like our parents are such mysteries. So I wrote this book so that hopefully, maybe by reading it, hopefully my kids won't think I'm such a mystery. They'll be like, okay, this is kind of who she is in a nutshell. I also dedicate it it's to the dreamers, and that references a line from a song that's in the book. So read more to find out more.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. Okay, last question. Since this panel is authors you need to know about, and that is, of course, the three of you, but also there's a nice tradition in children's literature of sort of boosting fellow authors. I thought it might be nice to see if any of you had recommendations for our audience of other Canadian authors that maybe don't get enough exposure. So maybe we can start with Susan.
Well, I would say for not necessarily middle grade, but for young adult, Paul Cochia is really who writes for Orca, and Lorimer is a great writer doing all kinds of fascinating stuff. He's pushing lots of boundaries and he's just absolutely passionate about children's literature in this country, very supportive of other writers. So Paul Cochia, and I think he's the person I would, we have so many great people, and they all deserve to be raised up.
Thank you. What about you, Selma?
I agree. We have so many good Canadian writers. I'll plug two of them. Suzanne Mead is also a debut middle grade writer, and she just wrote a historical fiction novel that's set in Newfoundland, which is on the eastern coast of Canada. And it's about a tsunami that occurred there and a family's journey to that tsunami. Simple, elegant, really nice. I just like it because I feel like, the smaller towns in Canada don't get as much love in literature sometimes. So I think that would be nice. And also, I just love her, Svetlana Shmakova. She does graphic novels. I think she's completely underrated. So she's done quite a few. And this is one of my favorites. My kids and I read this all the time. Brave. But we love everything by her.
Awesome. Thank you. And finally, David.
Well, I'll tell you a few Indigenous writers that I think are pretty awesome. Minnie Grace Smith, Richard Van Camp, Julie Flett. There's a ton of them that I think are really worth checking out. Maybe don't get it as much as bigger writers, although I think Julie Flett most people know about. And Richard maybe too. Anyway, and I will say though that I would check out Colleen. I dedicated the book to her, and she is a fantastic writer. She has a great series about a dog named Harvey. I think there's 3 books in that series right now. So aside from my colleagues in the Indigenous writing community, I would say check out Colleen Nelson.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank all 3 of you. That is our time. So we can wave goodbye. This has been a really good conversation. I wish we had more time. Audience members, definitely check out these 3 books as well as the other recommendations we just heard. And I thank you all once more. I'm going to start to wrap things up here. So tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's video recording and a certificate of completion. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. Not yet a subscriber? Pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access to Booklist for only $75. Patron-friendly, librarian approved, and free with a Booklist subscription. Booklist Reader, our new digital-only magazine highlighting diverse readers' advisory recommendations for all ages, has arrived. To see and share the latest issue, visit booklistonline.com/reader-issues. And we are very excited to share that Booklist, Booklinks, and Booklist Reader recently joined the Overdrive Magazine's program in partnership with Zinio and are available for your patrons to read in Libby. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. One more huge thank you to our panelists, Susan, Selma, and David, and to our sponsor, Tundra Books. This concludes today's webinar.